When I grow up, I want to be able to play the guitar like Dennis and sing like Christy. Maybe not that high. I am thrilled to invite, I'm going to scoot down a little. I didn't realize how tall I am when I had this thing up. I was like, sitting down, this looks really high. Our beloved Reverend Cathy is here. She is in her final quarter as our senior minister. So she will be retiring and still have access to us, and we to her, I hope, as we welcome our new senior minister coming up in January. So these are the final messages that Reverend Cathy gets to give us, so let's enjoy them all. Reverend Cathy.
Okay, I'm not dying. I certainly hope to be invited to speak again, but thank you very much, Doc. So I'm going to tell a true story about a man named Bob Butler who lost his legs in 1965 in a mine explosion in Vietnam. And he returned to the States and returned to his hometown in Arizona and picked up his life and became a car mechanic. And he became well known and well respected in the community. And one of the families that he became friends with was a woman and her daughter who lived just down the street from his mechanic shop. And Bob and the 3-year-old girl became special friends because they had a unique connection. Because this little girl, again, 3 years old, her name was Stephanie, she had been born with no arms. So she had the legs, and he had the arms. And one day when he was working in his garage, he heard a woman screaming, and he soon realized that it was Stephanie's mother. He wheeled his chair down the street, and he immediately and instinctively knew what was wrong. They had a backyard pool. And so he got near the house, and his wheelchair would not move through the dense shrubbery, so he just dove out, crawled through the shrubbery, came out to the other side, and he saw Stephanie's mother screaming and Stephanie at the bottom of the pool. And he threw himself out of the wheelchair, crawled to the pool, dove in, excuse me, and rescued Stephanie from the bottom of the pool. And we brought her to the surface. Her coloring was blue, and she was not breathing. She had no pulse, but he immediately began CPR, and he began to softly say to her, "Don't worry, we'll get through this. I'll be your breath. Together we'll make it." And finally, Stephanie coughed and caught her breath and began to regain her consciousness and started to cry. And as they all hugged and rejoiced together with her mother, Bob Butler knew that he had completed a deep cycle of living. Because 20 years earlier, when his legs had been blown off in a field in Vietnam, and he was all alone, no one was there to help him except a little Vietnamese girl. She struggled to drag Butler to a nearby village. She was braving the threat of other landmines, but the girl kept whispering to him in her broken English, "It's okay. We get through this. I be your legs. We make it." Well, this amazing cycle, this amazing story so wonderfully illustrates our continuing October theme of going further together as we emphasize the vital importance of building and maintaining social connection. And we remember that truth in the African proverb that I quoted last time I spoke. Alone, we can go faster. Together, we can go further. In South Africa, there is a term, Ubuntu. I've talked about it before. Ubuntu. It originates from the Zulu language, and it basically means, I am because you are. It carries the broad definition of a quality that includes the essential human virtues of compassion and humility. It's often used by politicians and public figures in South Africa to refer to the country's moral ideas, their spirit of togetherness, and the ability to work together toward a common goal. What a concept. What a concept, United States Congress. Okay. All right, South Africa's still having their problems, but they still remember that term. And Nelson Mandela, who was South Africa's first democratically elected president, encapsulated the interpretations by defining Ubuntu as an African concept that means the profound sense that we are human only arises through the humanity of others, and that if we're to accomplish anything in this world, it will be in equal measure due to the work and achievement of others. I know that we all believe in this concept, or we wouldn't show up on Sunday here, we wouldn't tune in at home to listen to a community that preaches oneness and connection and unity. Together, as centers for spiritual living, we embody a Gestalt consciousness in which we work in harmony with one another, with other faiths, and with other cultures to envision a continually expanding world. And I read this excerpt from our evolutionary vision almost every time I speak because it says it all to me. It says, we see a world in which each and every person lives in alignment with his or her highest spiritual principle, emphasizing unity with God and connection with one another, a world in which individually and collectively we are called to a higher state of consciousness and action. So the building of this whole world begins with the building of these kinds of communities, these deep, soulful communities that were called in Latin communitas, and included such concepts as partnership, sharing, and fellowship. I think we are a communitas of spiritual quality and kinship, and the foundation of this community and others like us is built in love and in prayer. And so we have these inspiring words and we have this beautiful vision for humanity, but how do we keep this vision in our hearts, and how do we keep it activated within our intentions and our behaviors? How important is social communication anyway? Well, quantum entanglement, addressed by Einstein and other scientists, proves what the ancients had been teaching all along, that we are intricately and forever connected. They showed that subatomic particles, once physically connected and then separated, are still connected. The particles can be eons apart, but when there's a shift or a movement in one, the other shifts in like manner. A rotation by one particle is matched by the other particle, no matter how greatly they are distanced from one another. If these particles are so connected, so at one with each other, then so are we forever connected to one another. But we do forget this inextricable connection, and instead of strengthening them, we often do things that try to sever them. And we know this. We know that times of crisis lead to this constant state of flux. And we've seen examples of people on both ends of the spectrum, people reverting back to selfishness and cruelty, and others who have come together with generosity and openness and kindness and love. In times of uncertainty and fear, the anxiety response is to immediately think of self. We know that. And we end up sometimes operating from the scarcity mindset that when one wins, another loses. If there are the haves, then of course there have to be the have-nots. And this polarization mindset leads to the feelings of isolation and mistrust and loneliness and insecurity. And when this is the reality, then people act in ways that are detrimental to the goals of a peaceful and loving society, because they're in the survival of the fittest mode. And the choice always comes down to this: do we act from fear or do we act from love? Situations, when we act from fear, this is what we create. We create situations that are worse for our health than smoking, high blood pressure, or obesity. We create higher inflammation at the cellular level within our bodies, higher susceptibility to anxiety and depression. and increased antisocial behavior and violence, and increased rates of suicide. Again, just pointing to this connection that exists between everything. In this particular connection, we're talking about the connection of body and mind. As the body outpictures the turmoil that is occurring in the mind that is plagued by feelings of fear and isolation and separation. And then we remember that the most beautiful and powerful healing moments in life arise when we remember and recall that we're all in this together. These are the moments when we find our common humanity and we come together as one. Social connection is defined as the subjective experience of feeling close to and a sense of belonging with others. And research shows on the opposite end of the spectrum that the benefits of social connection are 50% increased longevity, stronger gene expression for immunity, lower rates of anxiety and depression, higher self-esteem and empathy, better emotional regulation skills, better able to stop those violent impulses and turn to something else and regulate. And we know that social connection creates this positive feedback loop of a social, emotional, and physical well-being. And interestingly, research shows that the feeling, the internal sense of connection that we may or may not feel, this internal sense of connection is much more important than the actual number of friends that one person may have. We just need to think about young children who will automatically and naturally run up and start playing with other children that they don't even know, because they feel that eternal sense of connection that somehow gets lost when we grow up. The good news is that this internal sense of connection can be built and nurtured through our own strengthening of our own spiritual practice, through participating in acts of service and kindness, by paying forward our good in whatever ways we can. It's also built through self-care, and of course, ironically, it is built when we reach out and ask for help when we need it. Mr. Rogers used to wisely advise young children, whenever there is trouble, look for the helpers. We can be those helpers, but we can also give others the opportunity to be helpers to us. In Living the Science of Mind, our founder, Dr. Ernest Holmes, writes, "If we do not merge with others in cooperation, in unity, and in happiness, we may be certain that there is something in us that still feels as if it has been rebuffed." So, there was this farmer, and he was known for growing prize-winning corn. He entered his corn in the state fair every single year, and every single year he walked away with a blue ribbon. So one year, a newspaperman decided to interview him, and he asked the farmer, what do you attribute your success to? And he goes, I don't know, I just keep fertilizing and plowing and doing what's necessary, and I share my seed corn with all my other neighbors. And this kind of astonished the reporter. And the reporter asked him, how in the world can you afford to share your best seed with your neighbors when they too are entering into this same corn competition that you are? Well, the farmer said, when the wind picks up pollen from the ripening corn and swirls it from field to field, if my neighbors grow inferior corn, cross-pollination will steadily degrade the quality of my own corn. If I'm to grow good corn, I must help my neighbors grow good corn. He understood, the farmer understood about the connectedness of life. He understood at a deep level the benefits which occur from merging with others, as Dr. Holmes said, in cooperation, unity, and happiness. And then on the other hand, we got the wise guys, like this wise guy, Clifford Lett, who played with the Chicago Bulls back in the day for 1 year. This is a true story. And in a game on March 28th of 1990 against the Cleveland Cavaliers, Michael Jordan scored 69 points. But during the final minutes of the game, Clifford managed to score 2 points. And after the game, Clifford proudly said, "I'll never forget the night that Michael Jordan and I combined for 71 points." Wise guy connections. And this too is social connection, which is built upon the practice of active compassion. And active compassion is the practice of joining personal responsibility with social consciousness for the greater good of all. But you know, this is an interesting thing. Our brains are not hardwired to be compassionate. And we're given this important work of actively participating in building our more compassionate brains. We know that we can do this. We can build more compassionate brains but through our devotion to our spiritual practices of prayer and meditation. But the brain is the most subtle of instruments. It can tell the difference. Let's just say that we're meditating and we're focusing just solely on the breath. We're just focusing on the rising and falling of the chest and the sensations. This goes to one part of the brain. When we're instead maybe breathing while we're feeling caring for somebody else, we're thinking of somebody else, and we're feeling compassion. We're feeling our hearts. This goes to another part of the brain. It's distinguishable. And we might be meditating by feeling cared for, by remembering what it feels like to be cared for by others. This goes to a different area of the brain. That is how amazingly subtle our brains are. But unfortunately, our brains also come with what we call a negativity bias, which has remained over generations and centuries and originated in the primitive times where we lived, where it was either catch or be caught, fight or flight, the means of basic survival. So our brains, unfortunately, are like Teflon for holding on to good experiences, whoop, in and out, and Velcro for holding on to bad experiences. It just grabs on and lodges them. And we learn more easily from bad experiences than from good ones. When something traumatic happens, the negativity bias kicks in, lodges the experience in our cellular memory, while positive experiences don't get so easily internalized, and they can just bounce right off. We can easily, all of us, I know we can, find examples of this in our own lives. My best example is back when I was doing educational training, and I'd be flying all over the place. And I would have an audience of 100 for that day, and I'd come home and I'd read the evaluations, and 98% of them were positive, and 2% were negative. Okay? And what would I do? I would spend the whole night perseverating and ruminating over the 2 bad evaluations. Why in the world should 2 negative comments outweigh 98 positive? The negativity bias is a true and a real construct. And I know you all remember the story of the Cherokee grandfather who's telling his grandson about life, and he says, "A fight is going on inside me. It's a terrible fight between 2 wolves. One is evil, full of anger and pride and sorrow and regret and greed and self-pity. The other is good and full of joy and peace and love and humility and kindness and faith and compassion. And the same fight is going on inside you, grandson, and inside every person on this earth." The grandson ponders this for a moment and then asks, "Grandfather, which wolf will win?" And the old man smiles and simply says, "The wolf you feed." So we can feed this wolf of loving compassion by staying true to our practice. I've always remembered, I don't know who this particular sage was that said this, but it's lodged in me forever and ever. He said that when he first tried to connect through a spiritual practice, nothing came. Nothing came, but he persisted in his attempts until he could say, well, something came, but nothing stayed. But when he continued to persist in his practice, he finally came to the point where he was able to say, nothing left. Nothing left. That's where we want to be in our practice, in a place where nothing good or solid or true leaves our consciousness, and where compassionate experiences root in our consciousness so that we build a stronger and more permanent sense of active compassion for others. In so doing, when we do this, we're transferring compassion experiences from passing states into embodied traits. And developing trait compassion is a process that actually changes neural functioning. One scientist even came up with this, forgive me for saying it, neurons that fire together, wire together. I know. Just experiencing a compassionate situation alone will not cement it in your brain the way a negative experience will. In fact, the positive experiences just often wash through the brain like water through a sieve. So we need to help those positive experiences land and sink in and leave some lasting physical traces behind in our brain. That's what we want to do. Neuropsychologist Rick Hansen writes a lot about this work, and he says we can change this process of neuroplastic change when we look for the positive events that outweigh our day. Like the taste, it could be something as simple as the taste of a good cup of coffee or receiving an unexpected compliment. When we notice something good happening, as fleeting as it might be, we're advised to let ourselves feel good about it, stop, focus on it, ruminate on it. Try to do this at least half a dozen times a day, because there are lots of really good events going on all around you. And if we take the opportunity to notice them, it makes a difference. You can do it on the fly as each one occurs, like I just did when I was sitting here a few minutes ago and I looked outside and I actually saw sun. And I was like, hallelujah, thank you, Jesus. Okay, I don't see it anymore, but I can remember it, I can focus on it, I can call it in. So we can do this just on the fly, or we can do it at regular special times we've set aside for reflection, like just before going to sleep, when the brain is especially receptive to new learning. So we're advised, again, to savor the experience, comparing it to the difference between just sitting down to a meal and looking at it, or eating the meal really fast, or stopping to savor each delicious taste. If we can try to sustain these experiences that we're feeling for 20 or 30 seconds in a row, instead of getting distracted by something else, and we feel it in our body and our emotions, it will make a difference. It will build compassion. We start by noticing a small experience, and we create it and turn it into a rich experience by our focus. And Mark Lewis is one of the researchers who has shown that the longer that something is held in our awareness, and the more emotionally stimulating it is, the more neurons that will fire and wire together, and the stronger the trace in memory will be. So we soak them in. We soak in those good experiences. We let them sink in more deeply into our bodies, into our brains. You can do this in different ways. You can recall the experience and maybe feel it going through your body like a warm, glowing cup of coffee on a cold winter day. Or maybe like a golden syrup pouring down and bringing in really good feelings, soothing old places of hurt, and feeling the old holes of loss and yearning filling up with the good. And some don't do all this visualizing, some just recognize and know conceptually that while this good experience is being held in awareness, its neurons are firing busily aware and gradually wiring together. Again, any single time you do this will create good and will add up and make a difference, gradually weaving positive experiences into the fabric of your brain, reshaping it over time, and you with it. The implanted good memory builds compassion and counters negativity bias, because focusing on what is enjoyable strengthens the neurotransmitters like dopamine, which is the chemical messenger that plays a role in how we feel and internalize pleasure. So this is another example. A couple of weeks ago, I spent some time in the park by the water with a friend, and she knows who she is, Barbara Johnson. Okay. The feeling of the sunshine on my shoulders, sitting facing the beautiful water, watching an old man fish, watching dogs jump in the water and children jump in after them, gleefully, but the sunshine was hitting the back of my shoulders. And it was so soothingly intense. I was like, oh, I don't ever need anything more than this right now in this moment. It was wonderful. That I focused on it for many days afterwards. I journaled about it. I thanked God for it in my nightly prayers. I called it to mind when I was having less than fun activities. And I know, and I realized that as I actively engaged with this embedding of this joyful experience, I'm also making deposits in my compassionate brain account. There's other ways. This is such a simple way of activating and installing compassion in the brain. That is, when we're being still, we're being quiet, and maybe we're not quite praying, but we're just thinking and focusing. It's to bring somebody to mind that you care about, that you know is having hard times. And just in that moment, by focusing on their needs, and by finding a response, a natural response arising of tender concern for this person, and then enriching this feeling of compassion by extending a loving kindness, or the Buddhists call it a metta blessing, on this person, which can be as simple as saying, may your pain be released, may you be free from suffering, or may you be at peace. Just conferring this blessing and being aware of the sensations of the body as you do this. Maybe as you do this, you place your hands over your heart where you're activating the love that is flowing. These are the actions and the attentions, as small as they may seem, that are grounded in research and increase our ability to feel and express compassion for others by rewiring our brains and contributing to a positivity bias. We choose the wolf we feed, and these are conscious ways of feeding the wolf of loving compassion. And when we feed the wolf of loving compassion, that in turn feeds our ability to be a supportive presence in community, presence, not presidents, although we could use that too, and a supportive presence in unity with others in our community. A team or a tribe is more than one, and a jigsaw puzzle requires multiple pieces to make it a whole picture. Each piece of that puzzle is in service to the whole. Each piece of itself is just a fraction of the possibilities available. And then we put it together and we see this beautiful whole that is always greater than the sum of its parts. And as we each do our spiritual work to bring our whole compassionate selves to the group, we are stronger, we're richer, we're more diverse. As a collective, our treasures become boundless. The stronger the me, the stronger the we. And as we grow in our ability to express compassion for one another, the more we're able to appreciate the uniqueness of everyone in our community, and the more we all grow and expand in our unified richness. That's the way it works. We recognize that every patch on a quilt is beautiful on its own, yet the entire quilt is a magnificent reflection of the collective consciousness. So we're like an aspen forest. that is unseeingly held together underground by a shared root ecosystem that allows the individual trees to grow into their unique selves, but also brings the forest together in a reflection of the whole, each one bringing its own unique signature and making the collective picture more bright, more colorful, and more glorious. So as we move together and grow together, we flourish together. Let's continue to do so. And so it is. Thank you.
Thank you, Reverend Cathy. Oops. I have another goal now. When I grow up, I want to be able to speak like Reverend Cathy. Yes, please. This is our time.